This is a recording specifically for the Guiding Coalition of the Southeast Iowa Regional Community Food Web and our friends. And I have two extraordinary people who, amazingly enough, found me the same way. We found each other on LinkedIn. I was sending out little invitations. I actually had a person sending them out for me, finding interesting people and inviting them to talk to me. And by God, both of these amazing people took me up on it. And that's how we started to connect. And we've been following each other for more than a year. And both of them are doing extraordinary work in themselves. I'll have them outline that just very briefly, just so you can get a sense of exactly how complex the world that they live in is. And with conversations with both of them, I said, boy, are there some lessons for us when we're thinking about making the shifts, making the system shifts that are necessary to create a true economically viable regional community food web that operates on fundamentally different principles than the big incumbent system, that operates more regionally on the level of relationships, with the economics being a design criterion, but not the, not the endpoint. It's the relationships, and the delivery of value is the endpoint, and the economics are there to serve that. So anyway, I'm going to, let's see, Susan, well, you started, so we'll start with you. This is Dr. Susan Krumdieck, and she actually visited Fairfield, epic 24-hour whirlwind, Dealey Bob. And she was on her way to Scotland to take over the Island Center for Net Zero, Heriot-Watt University. So I'm going to have her tell you a little bit about, tiny bit about her background, about transition engineering, and then about an amazing early win that she had. And then we'll start putting together how relevant the work is to the systems thinking that's going to be necessary for us to do our little project with 100,000 people. So Susan, take it away.
All right. Hey, Bob. For reference, I grew up in a town of 800 people in the mountains in Colorado. And so I'm very used to the sort of sharing economy and, eating what you hunted and what you got into the freezer in the fall and what you grew in your garden. So that sort of thing. I also know how hard it is. Fulfilling, but work, and you have to have the land, and you have to have access to the time and all that good stuff that city dwellers don't have so much. I went into mechanical engineering because I wanted to get into sustainable energy. And after some good long time working through solar, wind, biofuels, hydrogen, geothermal, building energy efficiency, really coming to understand that that's all great, but we probably have enough people working in those things. And what we don't have anybody working on is how we change what we're already doing. And so imagining that, just like in the past, when the way we've been going somehow changed to a correction path, if you keep digging into that, what you'll see is that engineering changed. Something about engineering changed. So let's map that out and say, well, in 10 years, when we've bent the curve and we are now going in a direction that we can see is where we land, is we've reset to a environmentally safe way of doing things, where we actually, our business models are right, then what exists, what did that, was some change within engineering that I called transition engineering, changing the way things are. And the more that we started just working on that premise that we would be involved in changing what needs changing, what we found is that we've done work on business models, on supply chain models, there's technology, but it's often way more systems change that we're talking about, and that involves then perception and social values and governance, and that complexity is a thing we can handle if that's what we do. So I'm now teaching transition engineering online, hopefully to tens of thousands of people. I'm teaching transition engineering labs, which is where we work with communities and companies and, well, whoever the stakeholders are, to within a relatively short period of time, really discover that transition pathway. And once you can see it, then it's a matter of then slogging through the work of doing it. But that's a huge difference from just battling on, continuing to do what you were doing and trying to be more sustainable about being unsustainable.
Trying to drive over the cliff slightly slower, right?
That's right.
Well, great. So you were telling us, we were having a little preliminary conversation that was just got me all excited. You're telling me about a project. Now tell us about your posting in Orkney and the university you're associated with and the job that you have been accepted and a really amazingly fascinating early win you had.
All right. Well, having grown up in Colorado and done my school and PhD and work there, decided to go to New Zealand in 2000. So I spent 22 years in New Zealand, essentially using the freedom of not having National Science Foundation funding to work on what needed to be worked on. And attracted just brilliant students and colleagues, and that's where transition engineering came from. Published a book which can be used. Well, I think, Bob, you've read it.
I've read it. I made it through it. It's a badge of honor.
It says transition engineering on it, and it is for engineers, but it's also readable. So there you go.
Readable and very, very entertaining. I just kind of bleeped over the math, but the rest of it was really good.
Well, see, that's just it. Now you know what to ask somebody to do. Like, yeah. And so that book was published, and the president of Heriot-Watt University read it, and he's an engineer. And Heriot-Watt University, if you're not familiar with it, it's in Edinburgh. It has been at the center of fossil fuel use and making a better job of that. Steam engines, they're the Watt part of it. Heriot was a financier, and they do a lot of business and banking stuff at Heriot-Watt, and for the last 45 years, the premier institution for petroleum engineering. And so the president of Heriot-Watt had this epiphany that, wait a minute, transition engineering, we could lead the way on that. We could be, the fourth industrial revolution, where we correct the path of where we're going. And so they made me an offer to come to Orkney and to lead the Island Center for Net Zero, which is a Heriot-Watt campus and collaboration of the people of the islands of Scotland. So that's Outer Hebrides, Shetland, and Orkney, to reach net zero by 2030. That means the research is action research. It's research by doing. And just go, right? Just get onto it. And so that is what we're doing. We're hopefully really getting these methods of starting from the ground and working up, codified and taught and teachable and out there into both industry and community, and in a way that's accessible to everybody, because this is a ship that we're all on, actually, and these projects we're going to do together. So changing the world a project at a time where you are is kind of the methodology.
It's great. And so you had a laboratory that
you want me to talk about our first project?
which tell us about that.
All right. Well, I got to the island, did an interview with BBC Orkney, and was talking about, I'm not here to tell the people of Orkney what to do. That wouldn't be a good thing. We want to work with the people of Orkney so that we can learn how to change what needs changing. And what we need to know is what do people value, what is important, so I sort of go through these things. And a teacher of a fourth grade class decided that she would have her class write letters to Professor Krumdieck telling them what they thought about climate change, what was important, what they valued. And some of them were quite articulate, like maybe In 2050, when the country wants to get to net zero, I'm going to be 40, and it'll be a bit late for me by then. Yeah, so it was really just gut wrenching, really. And so I thought, well, let's just pick up and work through this process with this school. And what does achieving net zero for a school mean? Well, you've got two main energy sources, the heating and energy for the building, and the access to the building by the people who go to the building. So the trips to the school. The school already has a heat pump system, which is run by the largely wind powered grid. And so that one isn't such a problem, but they did have a lot of driving to drop kids off at school. And so we did the transition engineering. We came up with a framework, a package of learning and exercises. We took that to the teacher, and she repackaged them from what I thought was for kids to what's really for kids. That's fine. That's all good. And basically the kids then took that learning and created their own change in their school. And within this year, they will achieve net zero. They've set up the rules, the measurement system. They have set up their net zero heroes group. They've held assemblies with their parents to tell them what they're going to do. And they basically sorted it out for themselves, which was the first lesson we thought they probably should learn, which is how do you explore and go somewhere where you don't know where it is. You don't know how to get there. You have to figure it out. And then you have to help others. Yeah, so that's going really well.
Yeah, but no, so question is, how many classes were involved in this school that produced this 100% change in the school?
Well, we worked with 2 classes in this whole primary school, and the children in those 2 classes essentially recruited others across the school, and they set up their own organization. And my PhD student has gone in to do workshops on each of the next units that we had designed. And the kids love to have him come in, but then basically they take it and run with it from there. So, and they've made it work for the whole school. Now, I do have to say the principal was on board, so there wasn't any resistance, so that's good. But I don't know if you can picture the trepidation with which we went into this. Right? The parent anger that could happen. But I think unlocking the benefit that it is for children to make their own school run and to have that freedom, and of course the reduced pollution and the social interaction time. I think they saw that as soon as they started creating it, and then they wanted to grow that value basically, and the parents weren't going to get in the way.
These are basically 10-year-olds.
Yes.
Yeah, the system was created and developed and now run by 10-year-olds. Well, there's so much more to talk about, and I think that just what you've said so far, Susan, could give us so many ideas about how we would take an incumbent system, our food system, and apply some of those same principles. Essentially, transition engineering, right? If we want to go from a big, fragile, distant, monetary based system where all the money gets sucked out of a local area and the big companies elsewhere, keep all the money and rural areas are relatively devastated economically. I mean, you look at virtually all Iowa counties lose. All rural Iowa counties continue to lose population year after year. So anyway, so now, thank you. And there's much more to be said, but I didn't want this to be like an 1.5-hour video, but who knows how long we'll be able to talk. The next person I'm going to introduce you to is Espen Sivertsen. He is from Vivaldi Group, and just an extraordinary set of circumstances. We had the wonderful Leanne Gluck here on our SLC board for a year. and I bumped into Espen, by happen chance, and I happened to mention that I had this fantastic conversation with Espen Sivertsen, who's really into additive manufacturing like you. It says, "Oh hell, I know Espen. I worked with him," and so that's how small this world actually is. But Espen is up to some very big things with the international shipping supply chain and mining supply chain. So, and again, a lot of really interesting corollary lessons that we can think through for our project in what he's doing. So, Espen, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I before we get into and I geek out on this stuff, as you know, but like, I mean, my hope is that what we're doing is going to be a small section in your next book, Susan, because if you think about what we're doing, we have a lot of the same challenges, and yeah, I said this before. I'll say it on record as well. It's like it's a genius thing to do, to create a behavioral change that basically shifts an entire school from driving the kids to and from school to having them walk, which is good for them anyway. But it's not the school telling the parents what to do, it's the kids. And that is the difference between making it easy, or making it easier to stay the same than to change, and to making it so hard to stay the same, because now you have to say no to your kids, than it is to change. And we have the same challenges in supply chain, global supply chain as well. In order to adopt more sustainable supply chain practices, we have to make it easier to change than it is to remain the same. And I've been inspired over the last couple of years, because I've spent, quite a lot of my life at this point geeking out on 3D printing and other on-demand tools. What I realized a couple of years ago was 3D printers and other production systems are just getting faster, better, cheaper, more automated. And in many ways, that's enabling us to do some really new and interesting things. And I say new, but they're not really new, because if you look at the history of humanity, local manufacturing and production has been the norm. And then there's this little blip starting, with the Ford Motor Company and sort of meatpacking industry in Chicago, going into centralized production and manufacturing. And that absolutely has a role in the future as well, because in many ways that can be more energy efficient and sustainable when you're creating new products, but particularly when you're supporting that product out in the aftermarket in the local communities. Being able to do production there just makes more sense. And so what we've been doing at Vivaldi is really trying to make sense of the global supply chain, starting with the maritime and shipping industry, moving into mining and other heavy industries. And we're at the point now where essentially we're building an ecosystem focused on reshoring, relocalizing manufacturing in such a way that whenever you need a part for a piece of equipment, you can get it made as locally as possible. And the way that works is we actually had to figure out a whole bunch of different things in order to make that as easy. So it's sort of like there's that saying about like be like a duck, right? Calm and collected on the surface, and then you're paddling like hell in order to make it work. And it's very much the same with supply chain, in that we've had to figure out certification. How do we do safety critical parts? We've had to figure out IP issues. We've had to figure out the business models. How do we do analysis based on end user data, which is very limited? They don't have 3D models. They have very little information about the parts themselves. How do we work with the service level agreements, the procurement contracts, basically the full stack? And then how do we build a system where essentially, and this is where we're moving now, and we're doing it in South Africa, we're doing it in Singapore, we're doing it in parts of Norway, we're launching it in Sweden, been doing it in North America for a little while, particularly on the West Coast where we're based. And also now we've got a project in Peru. And essentially what we're doing is we're putting all the stuff that right now is stored on individual databases or filing cabinets. We're putting it in the cloud, so you have all the information you need in order to replicate the part. And then you can print it locally on demand when customers want it. And to bring it back to local produce and farming and that side of things as well. We will actually now, South Africa, I was mentioning it earlier, we're going to be working with non-mining companies in local host communities. So that includes agriculture, it includes hospitals, and other industries locally that could benefit from, you know, situations where you have equipment that you need to be able to produce. And I think we are part of a much bigger trend. I think Susan probably understands that trend way better than I do, but it's about understanding how some of these new technologies and new systems are actually transitioning and creating opportunities to transition us back into much more of a closely local production system, both for, you know, everything from vertical farming and back garden farming and those sort of like systems to on-demand production using your local mechanic as a place where you can also go and get metal parts 3D printed, for instance. And you know, that is technically possible already, but it's not quite cost efficient for most parts. And part of the reason for that is it's not widely adopted yet. So we're trying to figure out, and I'm taking inspiration from Susan here, is like, how do we get, you know, the equivalent of 10-year-olds or a class of 10-year-olds to lead that change, right? And the way we're adopting it right now is we've actually started training procurement professionals on the methodology. So they get the certificate, which helps their career. But then also now we have internal champions in these big multinational companies that help us basically bring about change from within. And we are able to, in an increasing number of cases, basically save not just time and money, but crucially carbon footprint and create local jobs. So we're really ticking the boxes from not just a profit level, but also from an ESG, sort of environmental social governance level as well. And we're hoping that that's going to be something we can do more of moving forward. But I think it's a general trend, right? Like, we're very open to having a conversation about, like, okay, what does it look like when a community actually starts really adopting some of these methodologies and best practices, in order to understand what is the total footprint that our community is making, what is our total need of spare parts across different companies operating in the area. Because once you know that, now you actually have a much better case for local manufacturing. And it may very well be that, like, there's a little bit of an extra equipment, or maybe there's a local manufacturer that already has that equipment that could be producing parts for more people, therefore creating more jobs. And now you're not shipping that value out overseas with the associated negative consequences to carbon footprint and so on. And I'll leave you with one thought around distributed manufacturing as well, which has been on my mind quite lately, because as I'm sure you guys are all aware, the earthquake in Syria and Turkey has a pretty significant death toll at this point. And in situations like that, what we are seeing is, right now, I guarantee you there's an excavator operator that's kicking himself because he didn't do scheduled maintenance. And, you know, they're pushing their equipment to the limits because they're trying to save lives. And in disaster scenarios, we saw this with COVID as well. If you have local manufacturing capabilities, you're able to step up and meet some of those needs. And, you know, we're working with our network right now to try to support some of the initiatives that are happening there, just as we did during COVID, where we were printing PPE equipment on the 24-hour turnaround from initial demand to resolved action. And local manufacturing can do that. You can't do that in international response. You're looking at lead times of, you know, at least a week, if not more, most of the time. And so I think, you know, it's the responsible thing to do is to go local again. And the technology is there. We need to adopt the systems. We need to adopt the practices. I think Susan's a good person to look to for leadership on that. So appreciate all you do, Susan. But what you guys are doing as well in terms of local produce is a big part of that, because again, in a disaster scenario or like global lockdown we saw with COVID, supply chains do get disrupted. And it can be everything from people misparking their boat in the Suez Canal to, long queues off the port of LA. But things do and will happen, and having that sustainable aspect also de-risks from some of the other challenges we face. So I'll stop talking. But I think that's a good summary.
And Susan, this is great. Well, I think everyone can probably see, connect the dots, because compared to taking 3 islands with 75,000 people to net zero in 7 years, which is the blink of an eye, to driving, what did you say, Espen, the potential of 90% of the carbon out of the spare parts supply chain around the world in mining and shipping, building a robust community food web in 9 counties in Southeast Iowa with 100,000 or so people. It's daunting, but it has to be at least as doable as what you're attempting, Susan, and what you're attempting, Espen. And what I'm hoping is that we can gather expertise like yours from around the world, and all of a sudden, all kinds of things come out, because this is sure, it's about produce, but it's also about beef and chicken and tofu and whatever. It's about all of the fiber and all of the foodstuffs, but it's also more fundamentally about local economic development. That, as Dr. John Eichard said in the video I think I sent both of you, he said, if you're going to have a resilient system that is significant, then if you're going to have a system, you got to have enough people in it. But if you build the system too large, you have to be like the incumbent system. So there's a kind of a sweet spot of building a system that can still be based primarily on relationships with an endpoint of service delivery, not merely profit. And so that actually is a fundamental premise of what we're starting with. And so the people that we're working with are not just farmers and restaurateurs and food manufacturers. They're also economic development people. They're also people who run accelerators. They're also political people, people who are concerned about the health and welfare of their citizens, the stress levels of their citizens. And so all of these things come together. And as Dr. Eichard pointed out, in a rural area, now we have cities, right? But not big cities, right? I think the biggest one has like 30,000 people in it. So we're essentially a rural area. It says the biggest asset in a rural area that can't be moved is the land. It can't be moved. And so building the basis of economic health on the land just makes all the sense in the world. So anyway, I think we can close it up for our recording. And this is hopefully not going to be the last time we get together, because as we develop this out, and we are going to be meeting at the fairgrounds at the Cambridge building, Cambridge room in the ISU on the 3rd of May. And we're going to be inviting people from the community, from the 9 counties, to have a visioning session with Tara Johnson, a founder of the Food Finance Institute at University of Wisconsin, and a Wallace Center fellow. And she's been here in Fairfield a couple of times, did a couple of boot camps 4 years ago that changed the trajectory of the food manufacturing system here. So she loves Fairfield. She's coming back. And so we'll have her, and we'll have amazing people like these two around the world doing maybe different things, but really when you dig down, not that different, right? It's really not that different. We're all trying to do something fundamental, which is change an incumbent system. And we'll leave on this one thought that both of you touched on. It's got to be harder to do the incumbent thing and easier to do the new thing. And once you get that, then the tipping point happens and it begins to shift and glide into the path where you want. So, gosh, well, okay. So I just can't resist. Final thoughts from both of you.
I guess if you're going to rework a system, just do appreciate how organic any system is, how much learning is embedded in that system that actually makes it work. And to change a system, you're going to have to learn as you go. So you always got to think really small, and learn out from there. But the more you learn, the faster you can change. So that's the direction I would go down. You know, I know there's a big world out there that the way it works now just isn't sustainable. But yeah, come down to maybe even just one product or one commodity or something, and learn what or like organically what a local version of that would be. Beautiful advice. Yeah, beautiful advice. So I'm showing up at the Farm Bureau meeting the 11th at Iowa State, kind of the belly of the beast, but they said that they're doing a farm day on local production and everything. I said, okay, so we haven't seen eye to eye on a lot of things, but hell, I'm going to be there. So yeah. So Susan, thank you. Espen, any final thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's perfect advice, Susan. I think that summarizes it nicely. And I mean, the only other thing I think I can add is, like, it's an admirable goal to be able to do what you guys are doing. It might take several classrooms full of 10-year-olds, but it can be done.
At least we know who to recruit now, right?
Exactly. Just finding those right sweet spots, as Susan says, and ideally something that's quantifiable and you can measure and evolve around, and then change happens.
Great. Well, thank you both for gracing us with your presence and your knowledge. So we will see you again soon.